our work. So yeah, that's who we are, and we are here, kind of hosting you in conversation. And we've shared the discussion guides with all our speakers, so we believe that you are kind of in the room with us, and we really look forward to hearing from you. I figured out that since there's so many of us, I'm going to encourage each speaker to introduce themselves. But before we get to that point, I will be bringing up Buki Williams. I will have Buki introduce herself, share a bit of work with us in terms of what they're up to at Akina Mama Africa. And then Buki will be setting the grounds for the conversation that we are having today. She'll be laying the foundation and giving us, a few things to think about, so that when we are having, the other parts of the conversation, we are able to speak from a particular, viewpoint, if I must say. So I don't know if Buki is ready for us to kind of lay down the groundwork for this conversation today. Thank you.
Thanks, Lara, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm really grateful to be in the room. As Lara said, my name is Buki Williams, and I work for Akina Mama Africa as a Section Reproductive Health and Rights lead. Prior to that, I lived in Nigeria and worked at a Section Reproductive Health and Rights organization that focused on adolescents and young people in Nigeria called Education as a Vaccine, and also done different work around gender and agriculture, and also youth movement building and refugee education. Really excited to be here, excited to be part of this conversation. I was excited when Lara asked me to come lay some groundwork in this conversation. I'm going to be honest that I'm not very good at following instructions. Sometimes it's part of my decolonization efforts. It's my contribution to the decolonization process. So if you feel that I do not go exactly according to it, just know that it's my ways of being subversive. I'm training myself.
Hello, Buki. Sorry, can I interrupt a little bit?
Yes.
Just to say one housekeeping information, just to say that this conversation is translated in French and Spanish. And so look at the bottom of your Zoom, of your Zoom interface, and you will see the world, the map of the world, like a caricature of that, and then click on interpretation, and then we are able to kind of speak the language that best suits us. Sorry for that interjection. Buki, you may carry on, please.
Thanks, Lara. So what I would say is, to start off, I hope that this will bring us, as we have this conversation, to a space of truth-telling, of telling ourselves truths that are important, of telling ourselves truths that will, in many ways, lead to our liberation. And I hope that that's something that is very important for us to discuss. In thinking about this conversation, especially around decolonizing philanthropy, because it feels like that's a conversation that's happening now and that's happening a lot. For me, I think I always think before COVID and after COVID. And I know maybe for many people, that's no longer something that is the defining factor of how they think. But for me, it was a very significant moment, right? The COVID-19 pandemic that happened in 2020. And I think for me, I still carry a lot of heartbreak from that time. And the reason being that with COVID-19, because of what was happening and because of the loss, the impact of it, but more importantly, because it opened our eyes to so many things, right? Things we already knew, but it seemed like the world was also watching it with us in real time. We were able to see the many ways in which the systems around us fail people in real time. It felt like before we were always saying, like, we need evidence to be able to show that this is happening. And COVID kind of just, in many ways, I thought, ripped the veil on these issues, whether we were talking about gender-based violence, or we were talking about the horrors of capitalism, whether we were talking about the ways in which, structure adjustment had destroyed the fabric of our societies on the African continent, and what that really meant in terms of like this neoliberal path that many African countries are on. odd the fact in many ways that we were able to see what care work really looked like and what it meant, the ways in which our society was not developed and built for persons who were differently abled, the ways in which we work and the possibilities of how we work and whose work matters and whose work is important. But I thought the same as well for philanthropy, right? I thought the same for this idea of the ways in which we understand giving and charity, and the ways in which we understand the donor landscape, and the ways in which we understand civil society and what it meant to be part of civil society, right? And the role we all played within this ecosystem that focuses really on helping people, and supposedly saving people, and what that meant for us. And I thought that maybe COVID-19 was this time when we were going to have very honest and real conversations. And it did seem that way right at the beginning. We had so much hope for that. And I'm looking back and I'm reflecting 3 years later on what that has actually meant. And I would be curious for those of you on the call, you know, what that has actually meant 3 years later if we look back. Because for me, I did think it started a lot of conversations, especially around power, for example. Because for me, I feel like we can never really talk about philanthropy, or we can never really talk about the industry in which we function, many of us in, without talking about the issue of power, right? Who has it? Who is using it, how we're sharing it, because there's a lot of conversations around sharing power. And as somebody who's been in civil society most of my entire working life, I find it interesting the ways in which I've had to understand power, especially when it comes to looking for money to do the kind of work that we want to do, getting the support to do the kind of work we have to do, the ways in which we have to shape shift to fit into what it takes to be able to get what we need and the resources that we need to do the kind of work that we need. And sometimes the ways we value resources over people in particular, or even sometimes thinking of how to shape the roles and the conversations that we have, especially within the feminist movement, around the role of civil society and the role of movements, and what that truly really means. And are we able to build movements, or do we need civil societies to be able to build movements? And what that looks like, and does the funding landscape provide for that? I remember having a conversation with a colleague around the work that we are doing within civil society to say we want to build better organizations. And a lot of people saying, well, you know, we don't get the kind of money from donors to be able to build the kind of organizations we want, or using the words of Hope Chigudu, building organizations with a soul. And I wonder how that has limited the ways in which we imagine and limited the ways in which we do want to build organizations, but more importantly, the ways we want to build movements. And so when it comes to decolonization and that conversation that we want to talk about, that we want to really go deeper, right, than what we usually see on the surface, and to really say, what are the political systems, what are the cultural systems that function, what are the economic systems that undergird the work that we do, and how do we unpack that, and how do we ensure we change that so that it really focuses on people? And what does that look like? And are we able to build an ecosystem that is able to respond to that? And that's why I kept going back to COVID, because for once, it forced us to really go back and be like, who are the people? Where are the people? And why is this so important? And why do we need to go back to the drawing board? And so I think there are like really serious questions that we need to ask ourselves, because it's very interesting, the conversations that we are having, decolonizing conversation, but there's also this bigger conversation that is happening around African philanthropy, right? And the increase in African philanthropy. And again, going back to COVID, the rise of that also happened significantly. I remember, you know, because in Nigeria was one of the 3 countries in which there was like an increase in relief money that was coming into Nigeria. And I think the same for South Africa, and saying like, look, we can harness African philanthropy. We have philanthrocapitalists now who can give money in Africa. Look at the wealth that is happening in Africa. And now we can harness that to be able to support philanthropy. And none of us ever asked ourselves the question, like, did it work in the places in which we're trying to copy? Did it work there? Is it going to work on the continent? Is it going to work on the continent in which we're seeing in real time increasing wealth and increasing inequalities, in which we're also seeing a shrinking of the role of the government specifically, and an increase in the care work that a lot of women are doing, that a lot of marginalized communities are doing to protect themselves and their communities. And we don't see the linkages between that. And we really think of African philanthropy as a solution to help address some of these issues. And I think it is quite important to see the linkages between those things, right? Because sometimes I do feel like African philanthropy is connected to this conversation around decolonizing philanthropy, right? Sometimes that we do that. And I think it's quite important to really ask ourselves, like, as we're looking at these trends and as we're looking at these conversations, it is quite important to look at these issues and see how they're happening specifically. And very interesting, because there was a conversation that is happening right now in the UN in terms of looking at the tax structures in our countries, for example, and the fact that there's net capital flows coming outside of Africa. And yet we are still reliant on aid and philanthropy to be able to get out of these problems that we found ourselves. And so for me, when we are talking about decolonizing philanthropy, I think for me, the bigger questions that are coming to me from it is that, how do we ensure that we're not relying on just decolonizing philanthropy to be able to save us from the crises in which we're facing right now? How are we able to see ourselves really within that ecosystem that we have, to be able to ask questions of each other and ourselves, to be able to say, we see what is happening currently in our context, we see what is going on, we see this increasing wealth that is happening, we see this increasing inequality that is happening, we see how it's really influencing the ways in which we even think about our organization. Because often we argue that, oh, only governments are doing public-private partnerships, but even for us, right, within our organizations, we are looking to the private sector to start receiving money, right? The people who are giving us money, a lot of them got their wealth from the private sector, even if they're African philanthropists. So what does that mean for us? You know, I know there's always that tune of wanting to romanticize our lives. And I feel like for us, if we want to be part of this decolonized philanthropy conversation, it's almost like, how do we radicalize our lives? How do we radicalize our work to really be able to ask ourselves the deeper questions that are needed, that maybe just decolonizing philanthropy is not enough, that maybe it's not sufficient, and that if we're thinking of the Shape the Power manifesto, that, you know, we are thinking deeply about what are the radical things that we need to do and that we need to challenge, to be able to say that, when is philanthropy not going to be the answer anymore? When is it maybe going to die and something else is going to rise like a phoenix from the ashes? For us to really be able to come back to ourselves, for us to truly be able to build the kind of communities and systems that really does help us see each other as not dispensable, or see each other as somebody who needs help and therefore, like, I'm the one here to give you help, but really to get to that point, right, in which we talk about Ubuntu in African philosophy, I am because you are, or in different quotes we've seen, or in understanding, right, intersectionality, in seeing our liberation as deeply tied and connected and rooted to each other. And that if that is what we see, then that means we do have a different way of looking at philanthropy and on whose backs we're building our new philanthropic models. But more than anything else, that we're willing to go beyond what would make us feel good. And this includes me as well, because it's definitely a lot of thinking. So I feel like I brought maybe more questions, but hopefully that you would think along with me, because I'm still thinking about it. but more than anything else, to continue this conversation. So again, thank you for the opportunity. I'll hand back to you, Lara.
Okay. Wow. Thank you so much, Buki, for setting the ground. That was amazing. I love the questions that that you've brought to us. And I know you made a joke earlier about not following the rules, but yeah, I really love that, because there actually were no rules, and I love the angle where I love the area you've taken the thought and the conversation to, and these are things that we've been thinking about. In my notebook here, I was looking at my notebook as you were speaking, and I was like, can we imagine a post-philanthropy world? And I have like 20 question marks in front of me. I'm like, I don't know. I'm just gonna do what I can today. But thank you so much for that. Moving on quickly. Sorry, is anyone? Can we please mute our microphones? Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Lovely. Can we move on quickly? So we are going to move to our conversation, for the day, building on this charge, building on this amazing setting that Buki has created for us. I would love to introduce our speakers for the day. If you could just give me a moment. Nana, can you check for me, please, if Amber Banks has joined the conversation? And if not, that's absolutely fine. We will move on quickly. Lovely. So for today, we will be having, activists and movement builders and workers within the philanthropic and human rights spaces with us in conversation. And we will be, kind of localizing that conversation around three main questions. Before we get to the body of that conversation, I would like to introduce Mishka Irena Pramodita from Indonesia for Humanity. Thank you for joining us. We have Madonna Ainembabazi Vicky from FIVSOS in Uganda. We have Katamina from We Are Purposeful in Sierra Leone. And we've got Amber Banks from Decolonizing Wealth, USA. So I would love to kind of pause and then, bring up each of our speakers and then have them do a quick introduction of themselves before we kind of settle down into the questions of today. So Mishka, if you can take the floor, please say a few things about yourself and, a couple of things about your organization and your work so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amolara, for the opportunity, and thank you as well for Liberation Alliance for having Ika in this wonderful forum. My name is Meiska Irena, but you can call me May. And at Indonesia Untuk Kemanusiaan, I'm serving as the learning, monitoring, and evaluation staff. So briefly about Indonesia Untuk Kemanusiaan, or Indonesia for Humanity in English, also known as IKA. IKA is a civil society resource organization established in 1995 during the New Order authoritarian regime. During its establishment, we supported the development of the pro-democracy movement through by providing small grants to the movement or the activists within the movement. IKA has 4 programs that we focuses on gender issue and then human rights as well as climate change and tolerance and cultural diversity. Thank you so much for having me and would love to speak to everyone.
Lovely. Thank you so much for introducing yourself, Mishka. Can we have Madonna, please?
Hi, Molara and everyone on the call. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Madonna Vicky Ainembabazi, and I lead the philanthropy program at FIVSOS Africa. FIVSOS is philanthropy support organization that's based in Uganda, Kenya, and South Africa. And we exist to help philanthropy thrive and to refine the practice of philanthropy, and that's all for civil society to thrive. And we do this in 3 ways. We shape the narrative around philanthropy, and a lot of that has led to conversations like, decolonizing aid conversations that we've held in our context. The other segment is around strengthening the effectiveness of civil society, which we do through our leadership program that focuses on the wellness of leaders, coaching leaders, and enabling them through transitions as organizations and as leaders within civil society. The final arm is around influencing the practice of philanthropy, which we do through donor advisory, advising on the context, specifically the Ugandan context in which we operate. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Can we have Kata from We Are Purposeful? Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening from wherever you're calling from. My name is Katamina. I am a program manager here at Purposeful. Purposeful is a feminist hub for girls' activism. We are rooted in Africa, but we work all around the world. We have teammates in over 30 or 40 countries in the world. Our work is rooted in the understanding that power is at the heart of the injustice and inequalities that girls face. So our work is structured around changing this power dynamic. So whether it's from the grants that we give to the advocacy work or to the pressure that we give governments, we like to say that our initiatives are on the 4 arms. We are either redistributing power assets, we're building collective power, organizing power holders, or transforming power structures. So all the work that we do is under those 4 arms of shifting the power and the power dynamics. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for sharing about yourselves and your work. And I think we can just pretty much jump into the conversation right now. So I think the first thing on our minds really to know is to kind of understand what does a decolonial philanthropy mean to you? What does it look like to you? How do you envision, a decolonial philanthropy? And I don't know if anyone wants to kind of jump in, please go for it. But I'm also happy to. But I know that when I'm on the other side, I don't like to be the first. So who's going to be the first? All right, can we have chatter, please?
Okay. So in our space, I think one of the things we discuss at Purposeful when it comes to decolonizing philanthropy is philanthropy trusting that the people they're providing resources. Somebody needs to mute. Okay. So as I was saying, is that the people that philanthropy is providing resources for, that philanthropy trusts that these people are the experts and these people are the ones that have the solutions for their lives and for their problems. So at Purposeful, one of the things we say that Purposeful is born out of the truth that girls are at the forefront of injustice and inequalities. And whether we give them resources or not, in their life, every day, these girls are resisting. Whether it's caught on TV or not caught on TV, they are resisting organically. So it's not that we are teaching them what to do or how to find solutions to their life. This is their lived reality. So if you're coming in with resources, with thoughts, with whatever it is you're coming in as a philanthropist, it means that you have to understand that you're not coming to save people. You've met these people in situations that they have been saving themselves, maybe not in the ways that you understand, but we believe in many ways of knowing. So it means that these resources should be given to the people with the expectation that they know the solutions to their problems. And for us at Purposeful here, we say mostly girls and young feminists and non-binary people. Another philanthropy way I will talk about is about access, right? Who has access, especially in the global south? who has access to wealth, who has access to spaces, because sometimes even going to spaces, like we were just having the discussion about the visa you were talking about, people in the global south always time, even to go to conferences where you can prove that, I'm going for a conference. The visa restrictions are a problem. The time it takes, sometimes you've put in all your work, all the paperwork, and then you don't even get a visa to go to this events, right? And that's a space where you could potentially get funding for the work that you're doing that you have missed. So it's about what are the grounds for this, for access to spaces, for access to funding and things like that for people, especially in the global south. I'll stop here for now. Somebody else can take it on from here.
May I? Okay. So in the context of decolonial philanthropy, I think it's essential to recognize that the concept of resources it extends beyond financial support. We had a discussion in September about our experience in dealing with external support, especially when we talk about international aid. And then an alternative to having to deal with this international donor is to come up with diversifying funding sources. While it is a key component, I think the colonial philanthropy, it also has to acknowledge that resources encompass a broad spectrum of assets, including knowledge, skills, networks, volunteerism, or even technological capabilities. So in addition to seeking alternative financial venues, I think the colonial philanthropy, it has to encourage the exploration and utilization of various monetary resources. And that includes tapping into the wealth of local knowledge and expertise within communities, valuing and incorporating traditional wisdom, and then recognizing the importance of cultural capital in the development process. Other than that, decolonial philanthropy, it also has to emphasize the significance of partnership and collaborations as valuable resource. Building connections with non-traditional actors such as community-based organizations, indigenous leaders, and local institutions, it can bring diverse perspective and strengths to the table. And this collaboration contributes to a more holistic and community-driven approach, where the collective resources of all stakeholders are leveraged for sustainable impact. So yeah, for ICA, because ICA has this concept called Chaturdaya, or the fourth dimension of resources, where we acknowledge not only fun as resource, but also knowledge, network, and volunteerism as well. So I think it's important to recognize that resources are multifaceted and extend beyond monetary contribution. So it values the richness of non-financial resources, emphasizing that the importance of knowledge, cultural assets, partnership in creating a more inclusive and equitable approach to philanthropy. Thank you.
Omolara, you need to unmute.
Thank you so much. Just throwing the question to Madonna. In your work, what does a decolonial philanthropy look like?
So I think I just want to circle back a little bit before I get to that, to what Buki said in her introduction, and talking about how this work has looked like post-COVID. And I think I agree with her when it comes to talking about how COVID drove us to a place of searching for alternatives. And I think even just having a conversation around decolonial philanthropy is in the pursuit of an alternative to traditional philanthropy as we know it. So I think to get to the point where we address what decolonial philanthropy is, we'd probably have to acknowledge what does colonial philanthropy look like. And from the conversations and the learnings that I've come across, it's essentially funder-centered philanthropy, where the funders' ways of doing and knowing, their knowledge, their decision around what success looks like. The decision making is centered around them. The money is concentrated there and, you know, just extended to the global south. All of that, I think, would be some of the manifestations of what I would call colonial philanthropy. So decolonial philanthropy looks like toppling that over, or maybe an overhaul of all of that, to make it something that's more people-centered. So community-led initiatives, different kinds of organizing being accepted and appreciated as channels through which one can channel their philanthropy. That would include, you know, not restricting grant or proposal, grant applications to your typical NGO style of organizing, but opening it up a little more to different ways of organizing, collectives, individuals, groups, even just how you make disbursements of that. I know that in my particular context, where CIFund is a funding, the funding arm of CIPSOS, it's, you know, not restricting even the disbursement of grants to necessarily a bank account. It's what's the most convenient way we can send this money to you. And in my context, there's something called mobile money. Could be M-Pesa, you know, just maybe a bank is a little out of reach in your particular community. So how do you address that as a funder in your context? Does someone have to travel miles on end to, you know, access a bank and get that money? What does that mean for their safety, the risk associated with that? So decolonial philanthropy, I think, also calls to mind consciousness and dignity and empathy in the way that we undertake this work of philanthropy. The other thing that comes to mind is desilencing marginalized voices when I think about decolonial philanthropy, because the traditional one has probably preferred more conventional kind of ideas and, again, organizations and structures to which they channel their philanthropy. So how about, you know, funding what traditional funders would typically be avoiding? Because, again, colonial philanthropy is typically your risk-averse, self-preserving model of philanthropy. The other thing I think that's important and differentiates decolonial philanthropy from traditional philanthropy would be centering solidarity, because I think that the more traditional funders were more, it's centered around like a transactional relationship. I don't know if it's transactional, if it should be called a relationship, but there's some, so it's solidarity, I think, would be the more relational kind of philanthropy. Decolonial philanthropy would be the more relational kind of philanthropy that values solidarity over conditionalities, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. You know, all the reflections I had, you know, just kind of solidify some of the thoughts that even we've been having, you know, just to think around the question of coloniality, you know, as, you know, think around the question of coloniality as, you know, subsisting ways of doing things, you know, continued legacies of, like, you know, serious power imbalance that is birthed from, you know, a past of enslavement and colonization. And, you know, Sylvia Tamale talks about, you know, the idea of colonization happening in two different, you know, ways. And she talks about two interlinked, you know, layers. And she speaks about the one layer being the taking of physical things, the plundering of resources, the seizure of economic systems, of human bodies, of labor, of all of this, the extraction, basically. And on the other layer of that is, you know, the coloniality, what Sylvia Tamale calls the coloniality of the mind, where we are socialized in a certain way to carry on certain things, and we don't know why, you know. And if you bring that, you know, side by side with the idea of inferiorization that Oyerunke Oyewumi shares in her book, The Invention of Women, where she speaks to the fact that coloniality was not complete until the inferiorization project was complete, where there is now two sides, of this coin. There is the side that, through the violence of enslavement of all of those happenings, has concretized a false sense of superiority. And on the flip side of that is a manufactured and force-fed sense of inferiority, right? So looking at that space, and then you introduce money in terms of, grantee, donor kind of relationships into that dynamic that is already toxic with, colonial legacies and approaches to doing, things. How then can we come face to face with that reality of imbalances, not just in the representations of how power exchanges hands, but in the minds, in the mindset of the people involved within the space? Because one of the things that Buki reflected on was African philanthropy, and how, people, there is a shift, there is a shift toward, now Africans doing the philanthropy, and, the mega rich are starting, all these foundations and all of that. And she said something about, copying and pasting these models. That means that even if we create models, even if models flow from Western philanthropy, which we know dates back to the days of missionaries, to structural adjustment program that made the government be more, streamlined, and now there is a lot of space for NGOs to take over and address education, healthcare, all the failings of the government just after structural adjustment program. How then are we positioned? How is our decolonization work addressing not just the physical representations of continued coloniality or of coloniality in itself, but how are we doing the work that addresses the mindset and the continued visible and invisible legacies of how, work is carried out? I think I'm just going to start with Madonna, and then we go around that way.
I think that introspection is definitely a core element of decolonizing, and just consciousness as you even, go about that work. And one of the things that it's not necessary, we didn't necessarily label it decolonizing, but now that I think about it, it could actually feed into it. So I think it was last year, CIFSOS was undertaking some work trying to build philanthropic relationships between private businesses in Uganda and civil society organizations, looking for alternatives, again, to funding post-COVID, and interesting businesses in the idea of partnering with these organizations. And even as we sought to bring them into the same room, we found ourselves wondering, and having to stop for a moment in the design of the facilitation process. How do we level this out? Because for the civil society organizations in the room, when you think, oh yeah, we're going to bring businesses here, they typically have CSI initiatives. Maybe we could talk to them about aligning them to feed into some of the work that you do. We realize that even that in itself carries power around it, because then the businesses are coming with money and they're just going to replicate what the funders have been doing. Come to us, come with your begging bowls, and we get to determine, and you get to compete for this money. And it's not, it's really just replicating the traditional funding system. So we did something small to get them out of the minds through which they had walked into that room with, and it was a role play, essentially, which was for, instead of asking the businesses to dramatize, play out.
Sorry about that. Can you,
It's okay. So instead of getting the businesses, the civil society organizations to approach the businesses for money, we did it the other way around and gave the businesses a scenario in which they are the civil society organization and they're approaching the other partner for money. So they walked in each other's shoes, in the sense that this is how it feels, when you typically have money and people are coming to you. As a civil society organization, do you still go about asking the same questions for 3 years of audited, books of accounts? Do you tell them to wait for you as you have your lunch break and, postpone the meeting at leisure? What are those decisions you make when you're in a position of power? So even that, I believe, made a difference. And it was, for some of them, they've gone on to have relationships in terms of, beyond the money, beyond fundraising from us, just come and be a part of it and see how we engage with community. And it also addressed the issue of making it feel like they're not necessarily part of the community. So wanted to create that sense of solidarity. And that was, just the beginning point of it. So as I think about what it would take or how to overturn the normalized patterns of power in philanthropic practice, I think it would definitely require a certain level of consciousness and introspection, even in designing new ways of going about philanthropic practice.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that. Can I go to Kata and then we'll have Mishka? Kata?
Yes. I think it was Mishka that talked about resources being much more than money, right? And I think when you're thinking about decolonizing and changing mindset is where you have or you need what is called a political movement, right? So it's much more than money. It's also the education. What are you grounding your work in? What is your work grounded in? And as a feminist movement, we know that feminism is a political movement, right? Decolonizing is political work. So it needs to have a political grounding. So it's much more than just giving money. It's also things like feminist popular education, grounding your work in that politics that it's not a day's job. This is a movement's work. This is a work that has been done before us. There were solutions before us. We are contributing to the solutions and we continue to make room for others to contribute to the solution. So it's grounding our work in that popular education, that political education, that this is more than somebody coming to give us solutions, because we know the solutions. Maybe in the days before us, the language that was used is not the language we use now, but it does not mean there were no solutions, right? It did not mean women, people, girls were not organizing and resisting, right? They were, and it's their history, it's their work that they've done that we are building on to continue our work. So it's also just, it's not being neutral in decolonizing. You cannot choose a neutral stand. You need to have a political stand. And the political stand that we choose to have is a feminist political stand. We believe in feminist movements. We have seen, history have shown us time and time again that feminist movements are contributing to transformational change in our communities, in our societies, in our world. So basically, it's just investment in feminist movements, continue to invest in feminist movements for much more transformational changes in the work that we do.
Thank you so much for sharing. Can we have Mishka? And just to quickly mention, Amber has joined us, and we'll bring Amber up for a quick introduction, and then they'll continue to contribute to the conversation as we go along. Mishka, please. So basically, the prompt is, what are we doing to not only to change the physical representations of how coloniality shows up in philanthropic work, what are we doing to change the mindset and the legacies that have continued to subsist up until now? Mishka, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So as I've mentioned before, ICA, as a civil society resource organization, one of our works comprise of grant making. So we've been on the receiving end as the funder as well as the fund recipient. And the conversation that has always been circulating within the office is how we do not replicate the work model of the donor that is suffocating. So we came up with a couple or a number of approaches, a number of concepts to tackle that fear. The first is we are aware of how the paternalism, is that the word? Is that the right word? Yeah. Paternalism, something. The typical top-down approach that is usually found within donor-recipient relationship, we counter that with coming up with what we call the community of enabler. So it is depicted in an interconnected circle. So no one is in a higher or lower position. Everyone has an important role to play within this community of enabler. Is also the fund recipient, because we don't want to position ourselves as also, because we're the funder, we are more superior than them. That is not something that we want to create, but we also position the other ICA stakeholders within this interconnected circle. So everybody has a voice, everybody has a role in the decision making, in the problem solving process. So everybody is equal. That's the first thing that we want to set in terms of like power relations. And then other than that is when it comes to measuring, because we have been the one being graded by donor, and then we also do the monitoring to the fund recipient. But because we are aware of how traumatic that experience can be, so we develop a method that originates from within the social movement itself that aim to build a shared understanding of the work and efforts in driving social transformation in the middle of the intricacies and challenges of the social movements ups and downs. This approach is called pemaknaan. It distinguishes itself from the process and perspective commonly known as monitoring and evaluation, because we acknowledge the social movement, it needs to reflect on its effectiveness in pursuing its cause as an integral part of ensuring the movement's sustainability. Because another thing that has been circulating is the knowledge that conventional monitoring and evaluation cannot properly capture the work that is happening on the ground. So the purpose of this pemaknaan is to cultivate an understanding of social transformation efforts by the grant recipients to contribute to the organization's to ICA's accountability for the achievement of our mission. And it also contributes to the sustainability of the social movement through shared learning and the knowledge within the social movement environment, addressing the grassroots struggles and the future challenges. So it's not meant to assess the outcomes of the work of an organization, but it is to provide meaning to the supported initiative, because we give small grants. So we want to see how it manages to propel the social transformation without assessing the progress, whether to determine whether it's success or it is a failure. So it's not to measure. So those two are how we try to not to replicate the typical donor recipient relationships. And because we are aware of the problem, while we are addressing this problem, we also want to come up with an alternative that we can use in the process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mishka, for those practical, methods that you've shared with us in approaching, a new way of doing things that actually intentionally moves away from these colonial legacies that we are trying to center. Lovely. So yes, we have Dr. Amber with us. Can you just do a quick introduction of yourself and chime in from wherever you are in the conversation?
Yes, thank you, and apologies for being late. Time zones, the time zone translation got mixed up on my end. So wonderful to be here with you all today. My name is Amber Banks. I'm the Vice President of Programs with the Decolonizing Wealth Project. We're based in the United States, and we do work globally to disrupt and repair the harms of colonialization and the consequences on the distribution of wealth. So I would love to just share a little bit about our approach and perspective around what we call reparative philanthropy. So we acknowledge the current and historical harms that have been caused by colonialization, slavery, racial capitalism, and other forms of oppression. And we believe that repair is an essential prerequisite to justice. And so our work is built off of the 2018 book that our founder, Edgar Villanueva, wrote called Decolonizing Wealth. And in that book, he talked about this paradigm shift that really drives a lot of our work. So shifting from the colonial paradigm of dividing, controlling, and exploiting to shifting to a decolonized approach that's rooted in connecting, relating, and belonging. And this shift is not an easy one. We know that there have been centuries of harm and that these dynamics have been perpetuated through all of our systems. However, we think through this through reparative philanthropy and thinking of money not as reframing money as being able to be a form of medicine to repair these harms. There's kind of three pillars that we think about when we think about repair. So the first is really the self. Omolara, in a recent conversation, you talked about the self as the site of liberation. And so really centering holding up the mirror, and primarily we do this work with folks who have who work in foundations and work in philanthropy who have wealth. And so our work, we really engage donors in a journey to be able to redistribute that wealth. And so we really think about, so we start with the self and examining the origins of wealth and helping folks understand that the money, the land, the resources that have been accumulated have been stolen and built on the backs of others. And so we really want to help people both reckon with that and publicly acknowledge it, because we think that is a really important part of the repair process, is not only just doing that work behind closed doors, but publicly naming and acknowledging that that wealth, it does not belong to them. The second part is around relating to others. So re-earning trust, upholding the wisdom and dignity of partners who are doing work on the ground to really start seeding power. And then the third part is really redistributing that wealth and power and continuing to explore ways in which that wealth can be transferred back to the communities to whom it belongs.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing those pathways with us. And yeah, we definitely agreed on that point to say there's a real need for us to treat ourselves as that primary site on either part of the spectrum where which we may fall. But more importantly, privilege needs to look itself in the face, and it's important for us to get to a place of repair, like you've shared. Thank you so much for your contributions so far. I just want to encourage everyone in the conversation. If you've got questions, if you've got contributions, please use the chat box to share with one another, and also to raise, you can also raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. Meanwhile, I'm going to go to the final question of this conversation and say, in what ways do movements like Shift the Power sharing transnational experiences, empower or encourage, one another within liberation efforts to contribute to the decolonization of philanthropy. Like, what do we think, the role of movements such as Shift the Power? What do we think they have it? What do they contribute to our efforts to build a transnational kind of solidarity in terms of redistribution of power and wealth, and ultimately decolonizing philanthropy? I don't know. I think we can just start from Amber, and then we take it around the room.
Thank you. We're very excited about the conversations among the community in this network and on this call. And I think, like you said, we're building a movement, and being able to build that movement across borders is critical, to be able to see the connections in our work and to be able to harness the collective brilliance that we are all bringing to the table is so important. And while our world is more connected than ever, there are also forces that seek to divide us. And so I think creating the spaces to come together and build relationships and build trust, so that when we are activating in one part of the world, we can bring our comrades from all over to be able to support. And so we see the conversations as part of the Shift the Power conversations as essential to building a transnational global movement that not only allows for the spaciousness of what decolonization means in different contexts, but also creating the connections and the shared understandings of the commonalities that we share in the forms of oppression that have manifested globally. And so it's both being able to show up for each other, but also to be able to be in dialogue and learn from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Can we have Kata, please?
Yes, just picking up from where Amber led the conversation about us being together, but it's also really important that, because most of the stories we've heard, or most of the stories we've written or have been written because we did not write them, comes from a perspective of a global north, right? So spaces like this gives us an opportunity to have a global south voice. Yeah. Spaces like this gives us an opportunity to tell our own stories in the ways we want our stories to be told, with the tools that we have to tell our stories, and giving it our own perception of our own reality of this is what our lives are. Mm-hmm. Then every speaker on this call today spoke about decolonizing from the top-bottom approach. It's also being in community with each other, right? It's not about somebody coming to tell us this is the solution to the problem. So it's about canceling those things that bring about. So spaces like this gives us an opportunity to both call ourselves out, because sometimes we are also a product of this system that we met. So if we learn from each other, we call ourselves out, others learn from us, and then people become better, because we are not constantly at war with everybody, right? It's not war. We're not trying to, no, but we're trying to find solutions that will make each and every one of us live in a world that is equal for us, and where people are safe and people live a dignified life. So it's just the spaces that gave us that opportunity, especially people from the global south that have been marginalized for years, and our stories have been told by people who do not really know our stories. It's just this opportunity to tell our stories by ourselves, to own our stories, to own our mistakes, to learn from each other, and to learn from spaces like this. So yeah, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for sharing. Can we go to Madonna?
Sure. I think that global movements like Shift the Power and these transnational conversations definitely help to ease the burden of carrying the drive for change at a national and community level. It helps to know that, while you're trying to overcome the barriers in your context, there are some global wins that could cascade and make it easy for you at a national level. So I would definitely appreciate the shift of power and the collective action that's being driven by these movements that we're building. It definitely eases it a lot and helps us meet in the middle in this struggle. And I think it also brings to light the fact that decolonizing, yes, would probably be the goal or the approach, but it helps us appreciate the differences in approaches and the differences in contexts, such that we're not applying, the same approach to decolonizing philanthropy, that we are cognizant of our different contexts, and we don't, advance the same universal approach the way that traditional funding has typically done to development and all. So definitely transnational organizing helps to address that.
Yes, thank you so much. I really love your reflection, Madonna, on how transnational organizing helps to ease the burden of organizing at the national and community level. Because sometimes when we are not privy to other perspectives and dimensions of what we are experiencing, there is an isolation that occurs within that space. And that is so, thank you, that's what I can say, yeah. Can we have Mishka, please?
Yes, I'm really grateful for the movement and all the discussion that is happening both on the global scale and on the national scale. One thing I want to mention is that movements like Shift the Power, it leads us to the conversation. It leads us to have a conversation on the national level, so we can connect with other organizations and then learn that, oh, this is actually a shared pain. It is also something that is felt by other organizations. And the cool thing is we also learn that because they feel the pain, so they decide to build an alternative approach. And the cool thing is that we can learn from them on how to to also implement it in our organization. And I hope that we can connect the conversation that's happening in the national level to the global level.
Woo, that's a big one. Connecting conversations that happen on a national level to the global level. Because when it comes to global conversations, the power is not equal. Some people have historical marginalization. Some people have historical amassing of wealth and power. And so therefore, global conversations can be tricky if we do not pay attention, if we are not intentional about our goals and approaches on how to get there. I really appreciate you, Mishka. Thank you so much for that. All of our speakers today have shared things that just make you pause and think, starting from, Buki laying the foundation and challenging us, to do the things, to put our hard work where our intellectual, to bridge the gap between, theory and practice, to think even bigger, even wider, and what it means to truly decolonize an institution such as, global, or should I say Western, philanthropy, which is, an institution I shared with you, for example, in the case of Africa, it's been here since, the missionaries. It was here during the conceptualization of coloniality in our minds, and it's still here till now. So it's been a long time of socialization, of information, of all of these things. And so the work of undoing that, obviously, is not going to be just simple, but the commitment to doing that and the intentionality really puts us where we need to be. So at Liberation Alliance, we do one thing where we kind of ask you to share your wildest dreams for a decolonial philanthropy. So you go as crazy as you want. We can just say it could be one thing, it could be two things. You go as wild as you want, and you imagine that future, that makes you think, oh yeah, this is why I'm doing this. So I'm just going to start with Mishka, and then we're going to go around, and then we'll take a couple of questions.
Okay. how I wish to see philanthropy in the future. I want to see increased community control because community control as in, so ICA is we're not really a grant making organization. We don't really identify ourselves as a grant making organization. We prefer to refer ourselves as a resource organization. But one of the work we do is grant making, and not many donor really support the work of intermediary. They prefer to give fund directly to the community in the grassroots. But so this doesn't really support our work model, and it really quote unquote threat our sustainability. And so yeah, because of that restriction, we have to cheat the system by also being the implementer of the program. So we don't really have much control to really navigate ourselves as a resource organization or as an intermediary organization. So we wish to see greater control over philanthropic resources, so we can articulate and prioritize our specific needs and aspirations.
Thank you so much. Can we go to Madonna, please?
Yeah, my wildest decolonial philanthropy dream is a philanthropy that addresses the root cause of the giant wealth disparity that got us in this place in the first place. And yeah, that once that's closed, we probably don't need philanthropy thereafter. Yeah, so a philanthropy that addresses that once and for all. Yes. So we give from a place of abundance, not, just because we're addressing the wealth disparity that exists in our communities.
Yes, ma'am. Amber, please, can you share with us your wildest dreams, your wildest decolonial philanthropy dreams?
Oh, I love a good dream. Thank you. So my wildest dream would be that Decolonizing Wealth Project, we close our doors. There is no need for us to exist anymore, because the majority of global wealth has been successfully redistributed to the global South through a reparative process that allows for community-led solutions to the extractive issues that colonialism started in the first place. So we just see that transfer of wealth, and our work and advocacy is done, and we can rest in the abundance that Mishka mentioned.
Absolutely, absolutely. Kata, please.
Yes, my wildest dream, that should not really be a wildest dream, but the systems and structures allow it to still be a wild dream, is philanthropy that is rooted in feminist politics, right? I think if it's rooted in that, that's where we talk about funding being flexible. That's where we talk about giving money directly to the people that are in their communities, making change in their communities. That's where we talk about report structures not having log frames and all those barriers. That's where we talk about people having access not only to money, but also to resources to be able to stand up. And it's also where we talk about intersectionality, where we consider people's disabilities and not it being a barrier to their progress and to their lives. All of those things that make feminism a politics, all of those things that have its very intersectional observance of people's different opportunities and how we intersect as humans. I think that will be my wildest dream. And then, as you all said, we can all live in abundance and
Amen. And then we'll plant a field of yams, and then we'll plant basil, and then we'll have vegetables, and we'll eat from the land, no more toxic food. And then, people in extractive communities can rally around their own products and use them to improve their lives. And, we end occupation on people's lands, especially on the continent, where people are traded, for mineral resources. Yeah? No, we have dreams. We have dreams. And I really hope that we continue to, within the space, to make sure that we bring those dreams to fruition. And this morning, Toby and I were having a discussion, and we were even really negotiating, like, okay, 20%, hands off this continent, 20%, we'll take that for now, then we'll build on that next. Those are the conversations. We're going to pause right here and take a couple of questions for you, our speakers to kind of answer and reflect and share with, the people that we have got here on this call. After the Q&A, Toby and I have something to share with everybody. But before then, we're gonna call on Imoleayo Adeyeri. Can you please unmute yourself and ask your question? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for calling me to speak up. So I don't have a question, I only have a comment. My name is Imoleayo Adeyeri, and I'm from Nigeria, but currently a doctoral student at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy in Indiana, USA. And myself and some of my African colleagues, we're working on African philanthropy, and we're starting with a systematic literature review just for us to see what's out there academically on African philanthropy, because we believe that we cannot really talk about decolonizing philanthropy without learning about indigenous philanthropy. Like, when we decolonize, what next? What are the alternatives to funding? So we started learning about more indigenous philanthropy, and we are looking at literature. And like Buki mentioned earlier, during COVID-19, it's true that a lot of African philanthropists stepped up, and we want to learn more about that. And we are adding indigenous words or perspective to how we are describing philanthropy in our work. We're looking at Takafo, Isusu, Njagi, Ubuntu. We're looking at faith-giving words like Sakat, Zedeka, and we're also looking at, community effort like self-help, mutual aid, and impact of community trust and social capital, and so many more. So we are still in the process of, we don't know what we'll find, let me put it that way. But this work is going, and I just want to share that some of us have started thinking about how this will be if we are actually exporting the different definition of African philanthropy from Africa to the West. So I want to say that we welcome collaboration and partnership for whoever is interested in what we're doing. And thank you so much for organizing this. I was so excited when a colleague of mine tagged me yesterday on LinkedIn, because I didn't know about this work, but he tagged me yesterday, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to wake up early so I can join this conversation. So I'm really happy to be here, and I'm happy to meet everybody here. Thank you so much.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much, Imoleayo. Thank you so much. Do you speak Yoruba, Imole?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Kushe, welcome. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, sure.
I just have to snatch that moment to kind of say hello to my sister in, our local dialect. Yes, a lot of it said by Imole. I don't know if any of our speakers have a reaction to that, or if, in fact, Buki, if Buki is still on the call, I don't know if you have a reaction to, what is going on in Imoleayo's research. And I love when you said, we don't know what we will find. That is why we do research. It is fun. You're like, surprise me. And and you keep looking until you actually, find your way. So if we have any reactions to what Imoleayo has said, happy to open the floor for conversations to kind of begin.
Sure, since you called my name.
Yes, please.
Imoleayo, thank you so much. And I think that is really exciting to see that kind of research has been done, because those kind of conversations are needed. Those kind of information, that kind of information is needed, especially now. Because for me, I think one of the things that is important is that we know that even the world of, and it's come up, the world of philanthropy is changing, right? The conversation around aid is changing specifically. And we know that in many ways, money is just being moved around. It's not like there's a lot of new money coming into the system. we just know they will be like, we're giving 5 million here, but it was 5 million from a different thing that they no longer fund, and it's not coming to this side. So there is a question in which, when all of this ends, because it's very, very possible, right? Or when we decide to stop taking this kind of money, which is my dream, I want to be able to tell a donor, like, I don't want your money. Like, your money stinks. No, like, I don't want it. We can build our own systems of sharing. So I think this kind of research is so important and so necessary.
Yeah.
And I hope that you don't keep that research to just what you see now, that there's a connection between, like, taking that Sankofa principle of looking back to look forward. So look at what is now happening across the continent, especially, when we're dealing with different situations, right? What's happening in terms of conflict situations? What kind of ways is philanthropy happening there? Because when the big donors leave, when the money runs out, when the camera leaves, it's the community who's left there holding the bag. And are we able to really use research to show that? Because I think that's important. I think it's also really critical because for many of us who work in the feminist space and who work in the women's rights space, we get like 0.01 of all of the money that's coming in terms of access to funding. So even the money that we're talking about is not a lot of money. Most organizations get less than $50,000 a year to function. Imagine running an organization on $50,000 a year, and the amount of the exploitation, my goodness. So for me, I really think your research is critical, not trying to give you any leading questions, but I think it's quite important because we can't just keep, having these same conversations again. We have to think of, like, how do we build the kind of resourcing that we need to actually be able to address these issues, because the master's tool is not dismantling the master's house. And so it's about time we really start figuring out, like, what we need to do as Modernos into those alternatives.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think the only other thing I want to add to the conversation on the research is, do not forget to pass everything through a feminist lens. The other day I was making comparisons between now and, the 1940s, and I was like, even though the world is literally burning, one of the good things that is happening is that we get to build a future that is not just based on what a quarter of society or what one side of society thinks. Women get to be a part of the building. So let's not forget to do that. We've got a question in the chat. I've got one hand raised, and I want to direct everyone to go to the chat and read other people's dreams. People are really writing their cool, interesting, dreams for a decolonial philanthropy. So please go in the chat and read that. I will read the question in the chat, and then we will wrap up with the hand raised. So the question in the chat says, what are we seeing and feeling in the decolonizing movement that makes us feel optimistic? Can I start with Amber, please?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I think what makes me feel optimistic is not the intellectual exercise of decolonization, but the heart exercise of decolonization, and seeing spaces where there are folks who have access to wealth who are doing that work to decolonize their hearts. Like you said, Omolara, that the practice of colonization is not just one of space, but also of mind. And that when folks engage in this process of repair and reckoning, that it can create shifts that unlock those resources. And so we've seen in some foundations in the United States, the Bush Foundation has redistributed $150 million to Black and Indigenous organizations in Minnesota. Lush Cosmetics is a corporation here in the United States, but also global, that has committed to reckoning and repair and is unlocking millions of dollars of their resources. And so we're seeing where it's possible that folks who have access to this wealth are paving the way for shutting down their foundations like Land Kelly Chase, right? And saying we're giving away $140 million to folks who are on the front lines of social justice work. And so those seeds of possibility give me hope.
Amen. Thank you so much for sharing. Can we have Kata, please? What gives you hope within the space?
I think as an activist, my hope is built on the rebellion. It's built on the resistance. It's built on the questioning. It's built on reflecting and, saying to ourselves, are we really getting aid? Is this really their money? Is this, just questioning all of those terms that we've been used to, all those words that they have put in our heads. So for me, my hope is that the thing that keeps me going is that I see more and more people asking questions, even when in spaces where there are lots of money to be lost, people still resist, people still ask questions. For me, that's the hope for me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Mishka?
What gives me hope aside from the global solidarity? Wait, am I unmuted? Aside from the global solidarity and then the networks that come with the movement, is when I see other organizations, how they can transform and innovate to maintain their relevance and the sustainability of the work in the face of challenges. How they manage to not lose hope in the face of the intricacies between having to deal with donors and other external parties that often negate or dismiss the importance of the work and the importance of putting their aspirations and work at the priority of the relationship.
Thank you so much for sharing. Madonna, please.
I think one of the things that's giving me hope and making me optimistic about this decolonizing movement is, again, beyond the global solidarity, like May had mentioned, would be embracing local resource mobilization. For me, that represents a shift in perceptions around money and whose money can do development, and even just believing in our capacity to actually drive this. So the more I see people embracing that in my context, it's in different ways. It's, looking at potential local partners, but also through things like the social enterprise model, which seems to be gaining a bit more popularity, to embrace self-sustenance and all. And I think that really speaks to a shift in the narrative around whose money can drive development.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all of these amazing insights on the topic. Just one last round, I think, of responses. Yewa, can we have you, please? Thank you. Can you unmute yourself and share with us what your reflections are?
Sorry, it's just more of thank you so much. It's more of a question directed to Dr. Amber Banks. But before I go to my question, I just want to say thank you to all the speakers and panelists. This has been a really informative space, and I've learned so much. But wanted to direct this question to Amber Banks. You touched on reparative philanthropy, the 3 pillars of repair, the self, which is self-explanatory, and then the third one is redistributing. Redistributing to explore ways ways of redistributing the wealth to those that it belongs to. Sorry, my question is the second one. I'm sorry to take you back, Amber, but just wanted to see if you can explain more about the second one. I think it's relating, but when you were explaining, I sort of missed the what it actually meant in terms of number 2. If you can just briefly explain that to me again.
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, Yewa.
Thank
And
you.
I was joining and wanted to get it all out. So I appreciate the invitation to revisit and slow down. So if we could think about it as kind of, circles inside of circles. So starting with the self, and then the second is others.
Others, okay, thank you.
And then the third is the collective, right? And so if we think about the self as, really holding up the mirror and really understanding our contributions. And this is true for anyone with proximity to privilege, wealth, and power, right? And then the second part is others. So then I think about the second one as a bridge, right? So how do we put ourselves in relationship or earning trust that has been broken, right? And really thinking about shifting those mindsets to acknowledge that the wisdom and dignity and power of people that the colonial mindset has sought to exploit, right? And so really, and then thinking about the collective, right? Then how do we redistribute as a result of that? But that middle piece, if we go from the self to the collective, we miss the relationship with each other. And so that's that middle part.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I hope that responds to the question, Yewa. Yes, thank you so much. And as you were speaking, Amber, I was thinking in my head, many times people ask, oh, why do we need to, decolonize? Like now I can see some resistance to the idea of decolonization and decoloniality. And it just makes me think that there is so much work when you speak about, the relationship with others and building a collective. There's so much work for people to know that we are in another disillusionment era, and that our plugging into the systems of power as one and the same controlling capitalist hegemony, heteropatriarchy, and all of the systems that form how we see the world and continue to police our experiences, we will see the connection between, say, philanthropy and women's rights. One of the things that Kata said earlier was, was to say that, their work is rooted in the belief that girls will resist. Either it is documented or not, either it is, whatever or not, and that the difference between that resistance and taking up a space is power. And when we raise up the skirt from philanthropy, the proverbial skirt, not physical, and we with consent, and we look underneath all of that craziness, what do we find? Power. It's a conversation around power. Whenever we talk about decolonization, we are talking about, it's very simple. There is power. Some people have it, some people don't, and some people use the resources of the people who don't to service the people who do. Full stop. Does that sound fair to you? Doesn't sound fair. Then let's decolonize. So kind of like, just tying it all kind of together. I really want to appreciate everyone who has spoken. I want to appreciate Buki, Kata, Amber, Mishka, and Madonna. I want to thank you so much for coming to this conversation. We really, really have enjoyed having this conversation with you. As we proceed in this conversation, I would like to bring forward my co-founder. I would like to bring up my co-founder and co-dreamer, Oluwatobi Ayodele, because we have a bit of conversation to kind of share with you and to talk about our upcoming report. And I think one of the things that came to my mind as we were wrapping up this conversation was something that Kata said about knowledge, about the value of spaces like Shift the Power and how they bring knowledge into the space from different parts of the world, especially places where we have struggled with historical marginalization and the lack of epistemic agency. We have experienced over the years that African women are rarely cited, are rarely, centered as source of knowledge and insight. And we are working hard toward changing that. And you know, one of the things Kata said earlier was these kinds of spaces bring those knowledges to the fore and allows people to share with, you know, other people from other places how we are doing things and how, you know, that is shaping our lived experiences. I'm going to pause here and let Toby talk to you about what we have coming up in the coming weeks.
Thank you, Omolara. Hi, everyone. And I'm so excited to be here. This has been an interesting conversation so far. And just to follow up with what Omolara has shared, that we're excited about this report. This report is our way of joining, you know, the existing advocacy around decolonizing philanthropy. And we've engaged with feminist activists and organizers in West Africa, Anglophone and Francophone West Africa, using, you know, qualitative research methods to gather feminist grantee experiences of power relations and its impact on their work. So we wanted to know beyond, you know, asking for more funding, we wanted to examine the donor-grantee relationship and how, you know, power works between that relationship and just unpack, you know, the power imbalance and the dynamics of it. So from our focus group discussion with feminist organizers, there was something that we realized that within the region, and we can say beyond the region also, that power relations with donors cannot be described as decolonial and liberatory. And based on all the conversations that we've been having today, it just validates that fact. And I'm excited that, you know, this is not something that we've brought out of vacuum, but something that, you know, we've weaved together based on lived experiences of feminist organizers and activists in West Africa. And so this report is a living document from us, Liberation Alliance Africa, to everyone. And it's also an invitation to join us on this journey, holding space with, you know, intellectual courage to unpack power relations and to also dream of alternatives of how we can heal from this existing relationship and also live out new realities of, you know, philanthropy in West Africa and also in Africa. Thank you.
Yeah.
You can follow us on our social media. We will be launching the reports very soon. You can follow us, sign up on our newsletter. My colleague Nana would put that link in the chat so that you can stay connected and you get all of the information around the launch. And you can also engage and use and apply all of the things that we've written in the report in your own context.
Absolutely. And just to, you know, finalize and say, this is an exploratory work. It was our way of, say, you know, of just peeking behind the curtain to see what really is going on, because we know that this conversation cannot be unpacked in one day. We did not invent decolonization, and we are not the ones who will tell all the stories of how that works in West Africa. But what we are trying to do is contribute to a growing body of knowledge, you know, that is shaping our realities and bringing our voices from West Africa into a global space to say our experiences does matter and our dreams for a decolonial reality does matter. You know, and so we are happy to just tell you a bit about the report. And like Toby said, please keep your eyes peeled. Don't forget to register I'm always begging somebody to register for a webinar or the other, so I will not say register. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter when you see the link so that you can read from us. Our newsletter is called Liberty. It's one of our proudest moments. We came up with that name. It's so cool. And we want you to be a part of it. We want you to get the liberation tea. Ooh, love it. All right, so we really want to appreciate everyone who has come on this call, on this conversation today. We want to thank our colleagues and friends over at Global Funds for Community Foundations. We want to thank everyone that we have had the opportunity to converse with and interact with and reflect with in the last few months, building up to the Shift the Power conversations in Bogota. And we look forward to seeing you as soon as I get a visa. And we look we look forward to carrying on this conversation and even digging into our bigger dream of existing in a world where wealth is distributed equitably, and that women and girls and people on the margins of society cease to be the stools that society stands upon to assert itself and its power. So we really want to appreciate you. I'm just going to look through the chat one last time to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Okay, people are just having a good time and sharing and talking. Oh, yes. Thank you, Dr. Fatima Take. Yes, I can see that the chat is just booming and people are talking. Please keep the conversations going in your private life and in your context as we go along. We are so happy that you joined us on this conversation. I want to send a big thank you to Wendy, to Carlos, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of our last interpreter, I think Camille, to say a big thank you for all of your help. And finally, to our speakers, thank you for saying yes. We know what the end of the year is like within the development space. And so we do not take your attendance for granted. And to everyone who has joined us here, who has contributed in one way or other, absolute thanks to everyone. And have a lovely rest of your week. We will see you in Bogota. We will see you on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter at Liberation Alliance. And yeah, one last thank you to Jenny. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a lovely rest of your week.
Thank you, Omolara, for hosting this space. Always
Thank you.
Fire.
Thank you so much. Thank you.